Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to what is our second last webinar for the National Regulators Community of Practice for this year. My name is Adam Beaumont. I'm part of the National Committee and the Victorian chapter as well, and I am very welcome and happy to introduce our panel in a second to this conversation around, well, what is the challenge of reading a regulator? Regulators are quite different beasts. How are they different to others? Before we kick off, I really want to acknowledge the First Peoples. This recording, and as we go live now, goes to different parts of both Australia and New Zealand. So I really want to acknowledge that all those First Peoples on the call. I want to pay my past respects to them and their forebearers, but we really want to honour the wisdom and stewardship of both lands and seas and customs that enrich so many of us, and really acknowledge that. It is wonderful to welcome two people to join the panel today, John Merritt and Cheryl Badigal. For those that are familiar with this format, I'll just give you a quick run through of how this is going to work. For our regular viewers, you'll know how this works, but for others, bear with me. We record these sessions, so you might be watching this live, or indeed you might be watching it on ANZOG's YouTube channel. We tend to get those up within 14 days or so of the recording being made. So if you have to skip out of today's session, that's okay. Feel free to jump onto the YouTube and watch the rest of it. For those that are familiar, we run a Slido channel in parallel to this. So if you want to engage and interact and ask questions or make comments, please feel free to do so. You can do that by just jumping into your web browser and typing in Slido, sli.do. And if you use the hashtag regleaders, R-E-G, leader, you will find us. And you can see it on the slide now, but feel free at any point to ask any question you like. You can also got the option of upvoting, so you can click the little magic button, which will put that question up. I've got it in front of me, and so I'll be able to integrate those questions as we go. We'll also leave a little bit of time at the end, so that any questions we didn't get to, we can have a look at. So it is my privilege to present to you the two panelists who are going to join us for today's conversation. Firstly, Cheryl Badigal. Cheryl is the chair of the Victorian Land Registry Services and the CRC for Water Sensitive Cities. She's a member of the Fisherman's Bend Development Board, sits on advisory boards for the Monash Sustainable Development Institute and the Literati. She's got more than 40 years experience in waste management and water, and in the environmental sectors. She got a Public Service Award for services to sustainability in June 2020. After more than a decade, Cheryl stepped down as the inaugural chair of EPA Victoria, during which time she guided the organisation through a period of significant transition and leading continuing reform, with a focus of EPA being an independent and model regulator. She's previously served on the board of Melbourne Water, Sustainability Victoria, the Victorian Catchment Management Council, City West Water, Sovereign Rural Water. I could go on and on. Needless to say, Cheryl comes from a very well-experienced position, and she'll be able to navigate the topic of regulatory leadership very well. I also want to thank John Merritt for joining us. Now, John is the chair of WorkSafe Victoria. He's been an advisor to ministers and boards and chief executives on leadership and culture and engagement and strategy and change for a number of years. He's a very successful executive with 20 years experience in the public and private sector. He was the chief executive of Vic Roads, of the Environment Protection Authority here in Victoria. He was the executive director of WorkSafe Victoria. He was also the chief executive of the National Safety Council of Australia, and he's held senior management roles with Fletcher Challenge and other organisations. John's also sitting on the board of the Transport and Accident Commission, where he's one of the Risk and Audit Committee members. So again, someone very well placed to talk about the challenges of leading a regulator. So thank you both for joining us. We will get started shortly. I just wanted to touch briefly on this notion of what does it mean to actually be a regulatory leader, and what is the challenge of leading a regulator. Malcolm Sparrow, who many of you might know, or those that don't, he's a bit of a guru in this topic, but he has this great monologue, if you like, about the challenges of being a regulator and managing these very competing demands. And he articulates it like this, you know, be less intrusive, but more effective. Be kinder, but don't let him get away with it. Be quicker, but be more careful next time. Deal with important issues, but stay within your authority. Be responsive, but don't get captured. Now, it's one thing to be a good leader and adopt leadership styles and characteristics that get the best out of your people and deliver through people. But how do you do that when you're a regulator? How do you maintain that social license? How do you manage the bads? How do you bring your best to a situation when sometimes when you're doing things really well, maybe not much will happen? And so I want to invite John and Cheryl now to start the conversation. What makes a good regulator? What is it like to lead a good regulator? And importantly, how's it different to lead a regulator versus being a senior leader in other parts of government? How is it different to lead a regulator versus leading a department? Cheryl, can I throw that one to you? Like, what is the difference? How is it different to lead a regulator versus just leading a department?
Thanks, Bowie. First, I'd actually like to also acknowledge the First Nations peoples across all of the lands that we're meeting on today, and paying my respects to elders past, present, and as well as any First Nations people who are on the call today. It is just sensational to be with you, Bowie, and with John, and of course our paths all crossed together at EPA. And in saying that, I would also like to acknowledge the regulators that are online today. I'd like to say that your leadership in keeping us safe, in protecting the environment, in doing the hard yards is what I appreciate. And even though I'm not at EPA any longer, I still appreciate it every day. And to your question of what's different between leading a regulator and a department, and Bowie, you talked about Sparrow, and Sparrow also, I think it was the preamble to that monologue, said that the lives of regulators are rich and complex and full of contradictions and pitfalls. And as a regulator, you live that every single day. You're between a rock and a hard place, being vitally aware that we're in the harm reduction business. That's what we do. Our job is to stop the harm, the bad things from happening before they happen. So at very best, if we do our job really well, no one notices. Governments, community, even other departments and agencies. Bad things do happen. Harm occurs despite the expectation of the community that we will prevent harm. This is so different to departments. So they deliver programs or policies, they build a policy and a project or a program to an absolute peak, and then they celebrate a job well done, a freeway opened, a grant awarded, a minister's speech, a media opportunity with smiles all around. But I think we all know on this call that there are very few smiley face photos and photo ops for regulators. Almost no positive media stories for regulators. But the job's not thankless. Of course, we take quite satisfaction in performing duties. And from an environmental regulator's perspective, I often think about tracing spills up a stormwater drain, sanctioning the offender, turning up to emergencies in the wee small hours, really sometimes witnessing horrific scenes, or working back in the office or lab to provide the best scientific evidence to the field. Organising community meetings, most often after hours, to inform community about the hazards. This and so much more is the work of a regulator. We're at the front line. Regulators are at the front line. This, though, has really profound implication, this difference on how we lead our organisations, because we recognise that the positive feedback loops that we need won't come externally. They come internally, and we need to build the confidence of our regulators from the culture we build within and the leadership we apply to focus on this.
Yeah, it's a good point. I remember someone saying that, you know, if something's gone wrong and there's a media story about it, the first 10 seconds is about what went wrong, and the next 50 seconds is about what the regulator didn't do. Like, John, you know, hearing from you, Cheryl, this notion of accountability and being super accountable to the outcome. For you, John, like, what strikes you as the biggest difference between, you know, leading a regulator versus those who are leading departments or service delivery agencies?
Thanks, Bowie. And can I just join with Cheryl in acknowledging traditional custodians around both Australia and New Zealand, and also just a big shout out to all of my regulatory peers around both countries. As Cheryl said, there are millions of Australians and New Zealanders who depend on you for the work that you do. All power to you. Let's use this next hour put a bit of spark back into what we do in the sort of post-COVID transition. Look, I think Cheryl painted a really accurate picture of this pressure or pressures that come to bear on regulatory staff. And I think the big leadership challenge in my experience is that, Sparrow's sort of euphemistic sort of richness and complexity and the constant fear of what might go wrong, that manifests in a lot of regulatory staff as pressures to shrink, to play small. And the whole notion of what we're doing in preventing harm is actually to be big, right? So this is not something that any individual can do. The harms that the community has entrusted us to fix are big and ugly and all pervasive, and yet the pressures of being in this space should cause you inadvertently sometimes to collapse a bit in what I think the psychs often refer to as learned helplessness. And for me, one of the biggest leadership challenges in regulatory work is to tackle that learned helplessness and convert it into learned authority, or more point, earned authority. We are in the change business. We are in the influencing business. We're in the business of looking to the outside world to be 10, 100 times bigger than we actually are. The leadership challenge is to just accept the pressures cause you to run in the opposite direction. Yes. And as leaders, we have to open it up.
It's interesting that notion. Well, it's interesting that notion of casting a long shadow. The idea that you want to look bigger than you are. We're doing 100 inspections, but they look like 1,000. We're doing 100 audits, but they look like 10,000 audits. Do you reckon that is one of the main differentiators between the regulator and their posturing and positioning versus a department that's leading a service?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. The classic would be, the classic example would be, when was the last time you saw a senior leader in a department give a press conference? Actually talk publicly about. Now, there's reasons for it. Often they're not allowed to do these things because it's not seen to be an integral part of the work that they do. If you're leading a regulator, you can't do enough press conferences. Like, you've got an army of, you're punching out media releases every half hour. You're desperately trying to claw your way into the Sunday night news or page 3. You've got this voracious appetite for exposure, right? Because much of the harm that we prevent, whilst there are big, ugly things, a lot of harm goes unsighted, right? And part of our earned authority is to say, this should not happen. This should not have happened. This is unacceptable. Listen what happened to these people or their lives and what's going on. So, I mean, that's the most obvious thing for me, that regulatory life's a very public life compared with department life, which is, in so many ways, doesn't feel the need. I mean, there's no brand on a department. I mean, departments change their names through MOGs frequently. No one has any regard to the fact that might confuse the public as to who they are, because that's not part of their concern. But a brand like an EPA or Works, we spend millions on these brands, building them up, because we're desperate to be bigger than we are and have the impact that we need to, because that's how you prevent harm. You prevent harm by changing the behaviour of millions of people.
Yeah, it's a really good point around the brand notion. Like, with an EPA or a WorkSafe, the name is written above the door. It's very clear what we're here to do, and what we're trying to achieve. Cheryl, question to you, when you've got a departmental regulator versus an independent regulator, does that make it more challenging? Does that make that almost this hybrid situation make it more difficult?
Look, it very much can, but I think it's the same issue. At the end of the day, that departmental regulator is leading a bunch of regulators to do their job, and how that person, he or she, actually leads, I think, becomes critical. And so I've often, and when I think about leadership, and I know John feels the same about this is not leadership at the top of the organisation. And I think we have very much a role to model leadership, but leadership is the field officer who is taking a decision about a regulatory matter. Sometimes it's a really brave decision, And that's what I think about as leadership. So the leadership within a department, look, some of the rules are a bit different, but I think about some of the conservation regulators in Victoria, I think, you know, who are within a department, but I see the same pattern of being a regulator. I don't see that as being, there are some constraints within a department, but nevertheless, I see the same patterns of being a regulator within a department. It is the agency of regulation, which is the unit.
How do you protect that independence of the regulator? Because there always is that, you know, concern that the regulator just becomes an arm or a vehicle for ministerial interests or the focus of the minister or the advisor of the day. How do you avoid this? Well, how do you protect the interests of the regulator as a standalone entity, be them in the department or be them standalone?
John and I have both had experiences where we have, and I suppose it starts with whatever your legislation says. You know, if you can't be directed at all, that's an advantage, but it's, you know, that not all regulators are in that space. But nevertheless, I think as regulators, we've all had that experience of bringing to somebody an opinion of what we're going to do or how we're going to do it, and there is a disagreement. And I think what we do is we build up the body of evidence, and that starts from the field officer. We go through the review processes, and sometimes that must feel to the field like it's endless review processes. We apply the science or engineering or whatever we need to do over the decision-making process, and we make a decision. And often I think the best way of getting around this is to ensure there are no surprises about the decision we're about to make, so that forecasting that decision, even in the case of EBA Victoria, which doesn't have, it's not subject to ministerial direction in those authority decisions, I think it's very important that there are no surprises. But, you know, I think it's the build up from the time that the observation happened in the field through the processes internally until you make a decision that you are going to, it could be a prosecution, and then after that, it's ensuring no surprises.
John, what's your experience around this? You know,
I just wanted to follow on from a point Cheryl made earlier. To me, Bowie, it is both hard and simple, this issue about influence, in my experience. Cheryl talked about the fundamental issue of accountability. So look, my message to all of my colleagues out there, this all comes down to us as regulators accepting accountability for whatever pain, whatever harm the community wants less of. And if we fall into that helplessness trap and measure ourselves on activity, then you can't be surprised that others want to interfere in what we do and say, I think you should substitute this activity for that, right? But if you are absolutely steadfast about, no, we're here to prevent harm, whether it's death, injury, pollution, road trauma, right? We are here, and this is the harm that we are preventing. And every strategy we do and every decision we make is about less of that harm. Then any attempt to interfere is seen to increase harm. Right? You actually build a real, like, okay, well, we could stop doing it. Like, the reason why we're doing what we're doing is because we think someone's going to be hurt there. If he wants to do something else, that pain will arise. And it tends to, in my experience, those conversations simply don't arise as long as you steadfastly bloody seize, capture and hold the moral ground that everything we're doing is predicated on the evidence that we have to reduce that harm, and we will judge what we do on that measure alone. Everything we do, we will judge on preventing harm to people. Once you, as I say, you fall back into the being small, closing in, that sort of, oh, well, I'm not really, it's not up to me, I did my job, but it wasn't my fault, then you are a sitting duck for every bugger to tell you what to do and how to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting because we're getting into this piece of culture and, you know, trying to create a really positive culture when fundamentally you're dealing with bad things, and sometimes you're dealing with bad dishonest, and sometimes dangerous people. Like, Cheryl, can I put this one to you? Like, how do you create a positive culture in the circumstances where, look, bad things do happen and your teams will have to deal with people who are just not very nice and situations that aren't very pleasant?
Thanks, Bowie. Look, John mentioned accountability, and I do think it's absolutely critical that we build a culture that supports well-trained, confident regulators to do their job. But I think the first elements of the great regulatory culture are accountability, and I would add integrity, which is probably wrapped up in that accountability anyway. And no ifs, no buts, no excuses, accountability and integrity, the very first elements. And I think to build that, it must first be actively modelled and widely communicated by the senior leadership team. No ifs, no buts, no excuses. And it's not to demand perfection, because actually that perfection is a trait that is a real trap for regulators. So when leaders make errors, when we stuff up, we need to use that as an opportunity to talk about and be very transparent about what happened, and to use as an example of how we expect everyone to behave when we stuff up. And I remember, John, you and I shared the leadership at EPA Victoria. I don't know how many times we stood on a platform and said, go out and do your job. We've selected you for your skills and knowledge. We've trained you. You are on the spot and equipped to use your skills, knowledge and judgment to make a decision. If you get it wrong, and mostly you won't, then come back and we'll debrief on what went wrong and what we can all learn from it. You're the best person to exercise that judgment, make the regulatory call, you are authorised to act. And so what we're saying is, we've got your back. You have our confidence. We back this up with a system of really open and transparent dealings when there are genuine errors, building knowledge and confidence. And when we do this as leaders, it builds trust in the system, it builds trust in us, and it builds respect. And so they are the other elements that I think. So accountability, integrity, trust and respect. And I always start my journey with building an organisational culture by knowing that I have to demonstrate accountability, integrity, and build trust and respect. And it's a massive first step when you walk into an organisation, and it involves a very personal vulnerability, and you have to put yourself as a leader on the line. Now, I'm not just talking about the people at the top of the organisation. I'm talking about leadership throughout the organisation, but I think it starts with us. But of course, what needs to follow then, Bowie, is training, systems, data to measure it and all of that.
Well, yeah, because there's that unwavering focus in the integrity piece, but there's also the end doesn't always justify the means. Like, the regulators tend to get themselves in trouble sometimes when they go a little bit off the reservation. John, what's your take in terms of trying to build culture and sustain it in an environment that is fundamentally continually grating on your teams and that cohesion?
Well, I think Cheryl's right. I mean, it starts with leadership. Nothing changes until the leaders change, and when the leaders change, everything changes. And I would say to all my colleagues out there, when I reflected, I was well into my 50s probably before I really honestly accepted that leadership matters. Don't wait that long, right? It really matters, right? And just as Cheryl said, it's about getting that objective anonymous feedback of what people are reading from your leadership to say, well, hang on, I'm saying to you, I'm going to hold you to account for your interventions and what changes in it. But actually, unless they see the leadership doing that all the time as well, then they're just hollow words. Because where the leadership issue gets willing is that let's accept that we're going to judge ourselves by how much harm occurs out there, right? And we're going to try and bring it down. Well, the next step, and the next painful step is, well, that involves making some choices about which harm we go after, because it's simply an intellectual lie to say we can reduce everything, right? You can't, right? You can't do it all. So you've got to pick. You've got to choose what you're not going to go after, And you've got to be open and transparent about everybody, because in harm prevention, every issue is worthy. So, you know, the real leadership challenge out there, and we see this, you know, everywhere, is, okay, given that we're in the influencing business, you can only leverage a result, not activity. What result are we going to go after? What is the harms that we are going to choose? And logically, they need to be the worst, right? Because that's the defendable piece. And of course, there's a real natural, why would you pick the hardest thing to fix? Well, because actually that's the thing that we'll prove ourselves on. And that's what, and often when you do that, you are choosing to reduce a harm for which there is no known answer, right? So you're actually committing as an act of faith. So, well, look, fact is, we don't know how to do that, but the community is paying us to fix that problem. So we are not going to give up until it's fixed. And I think from a leadership position to be, you know, it's so fundamental to say to our staff, we are making choices and they're transparent. But having made that choice, because it's a serious problem that we have to stop, we are not going to give up. We are not going to give up until it's fixed. And that means our appetite to try things is so much wider. Like our preparedness to fail is so much better, because we don't have the answer and we know we'll find it through trying. And I think that it goes to the heart of the issue that Cheryl talked to. We spend a lot of time saying to people, look, your job is the exercise of judgment. We need you to use your judgment to fix that problem. And if in your judgment it requires X and that turns sour, we will be there for you. We can defend, if you make every effort to prevent that harm, that is easy for us to defend. They are what's called good mistakes. But if you keep something in the tank, if you take short steps, if you say, I can't do it, that is not defendable. There's no leader in the world that can stand up for that. Right?
And that notion of throwing your team at the problem, or at least having clarity of the problem, or choosing a problem, like, how do you, I'll put this one to you, Cheryl, like, how do you maintain that when we know that bad things will happen? We have flammable cladding, we have wastes that end up in the wrong spot, we have dangerous goods that didn't work out, we have people who provided services to disabled or vulnerable people that shouldn't have. Like, Cheryl, how do you maintain, because you have to make choices, you can't run everything down, how do you maintain that culture when inevitably the bad things happen?
I think what John said is really instrumental, and that is, you know, choosing where you're going to go. But having done that, what you actually have to do is then evaluate it. You have to bring that back inside. You have to talk to your colleagues about, did it work and did it not? And at the same time, so this is not an ad hoc process. This is a planned process. And at the very same time, you are building the culture of the regulator when you do that. You're building a review process into that. You're building leadership across the board, from the field upwards and downwards, from the team, from the leadership teams. And by that process of open review about either fixing the harm or even not fixing the harm, then you're starting to build confidence, respect, trust. I do think, though, that you, at the same time, you have to measure culture. You can't just assume that because you see a great culture in one team and there's a sort of a slightly invisible team operating in the back corner, that we've got a great culture. So therefore, I think measurement of culture, analysis, discussions about what sort of culture we want in this organisation. What does it feel like to work here? Is this a great organisation to work for? If not, what do we need to do in this culture to make it work? So I think the work of the regulator goes on, and you use that to build the culture that you want, and you seek out, this is a really important point, you seek out the pockets where the culture it needs to be improved, exposed, and you do it in exactly the same way. You talk about what's not working. Why is this so? And sometimes you find some really destructive behaviours, and they may be in a so-called leadership role, maybe it's a management role, and that's when you really have to apply a different lens to, how do we all get onto the same page. Some people won't make it in that journey, but most do, because most of us want to work in a culture that is supportive, particularly in a regulator, because it is so hard.
Just a reminder, people listening in, you can ask any question you like. You will have noticed I'm grabbing a few off the list here, but if you go to slido, sli.do, and use the hashtag regleader, you can throw in any question you like. John, there's one in here, around this notion of not all regulators are big, some are quite small, very small, in fact. Sometimes it's an office or a commissioner with a few people, sometimes limited powers. How do you maintain that gravitas, that focus, when in reality your scope might be way bigger than the resources you can bring to bear?
Well, I think there are a couple of things. One is you do have to think big, and you've got to be prepared to leverage at everything. Again, it was many years before I understood the power of brand. Brand, we think of something for fast-moving consumer goods. Actually, brands in public work and in harm prevention are awesome things. Brand attributes, and we'll come back a bit later and talk about the challenge of doing teams. But really, again, no matter how big or small you are, what you've got to do is go and fix something. Right. I mean, there's no story in activity. Right? There is a story in problem solved. This used to be, we went out there and we nailed it. Right? I mean, that, and so, but of course, all the pressure on, because the pressure is to, those choices are, public service notorious for not making choices, starting more things and not stopping. But if you're in a small outfit, you haven't got much. What is your intelligence? What is your data? And what is your emotional connection tell you? Actually, this is the problem we have to fix. I think when early on I joined the EPA, Cheryl, I remember, because I come from a regulatory background, but not an environment one. I remember asking staff, in a meeting one day, what's the biggest problem we've got? What is the thing that you most are concerned about? And they all spoke with one. It turned out to be a suburb in Melbourne called Brooklyn, which had an old series of wastes and tips and things downwind and everything. They all, as one, rose up, no, this is it, this is the worst, And I think, right, well, let's go and fix it. No, we don't, there's a whole lot of reasons why we can't. Well, no, let's go and fix it. And let's promise that community we're not going to give up until we do. So if you're in a small outfit, you haven't got, what's your Brooklyn? What is it to you? What is and you know what it is. Well, you all know what it is. What's the one that we don't want, that we feel, well, why don't we turn that into our big leveraging trick? Can I just just follow up on one point that Cheryl was making really well about this issue of the culture and living with this sort of threat of all these things going on. I was a regulator for a number of years, trying to stop some really awful things happening. And I remember distinctly going to bed at night thinking, well, something really bad could happen overnight, and in the morning that will be my job and I'll be gone. And I didn't find that motivating at all. And then partway through my career, I had the experience of something bad did happen. And I found myself in a judicial inquiry being examined by counsel assisting. And I came out of that process thinking, actually, these inquiries are not actually, people aren't stupid. They're not saying, how did you not anticipate everything? What they are quizzing you about is, did you do your best? So for all of us out there, don't be shy about worrying about things that you can't predict. That's not the test that will be applied to you when your day in the witness box comes, whether it's a Royal Commission, judicial inquiry, parliamentary inquiry, talkback radio, they're all variations on the same thing. The question, the underlying question that you will have to answer is, did you and your team do their absolute gut-busting best? Did they err on the side of doing, You know, did we take whatever evidence we had, not wait for everything before we made a decision? And did every decision that we made and every action that we took, was it premised on what will protect the most number of people in the best way? And if you go into it with that mindset, you'll be right, right? But it's hard to do your best. Like, this is not hard work. This is the butterflies in the stomach. I'm not sure this is going to thing. How's it going? This is really gut busting, having a crack. That's the way that you thrive in this space. And picking these unfixable problems, that's the exciting part of Regulator. That's where all the joy comes from. Because the fact is, our best is enough. You got to believe in yourself. Our best is enough. And if you can only mobilise it, you'll be staggered at how much real authority and power you have.
That notion of breaking inertia and just having a go and a bias towards action, I think it's a really good point, because that is not, I think many people would say they are not general characteristics of government, but they certainly need to be the characteristics of a regulator. Cheryl, with your chair hat on, you've chaired many organisations, regulators and others. How do you know if your organisation is giving their best?
Yeah, I think when you look at I can tell, frankly, when I look at the faces, the moment I walk in. And I reckon John would probably say the same thing.
Yeah.
If I look at a whole, or the other one was, I'm appointed, and then, you know, I first say my door is open, and then I find a queue of people outside my door, or right. I get you know, little notes left on my desk overnight. I don't think it's hard to tell. You know, you look at the face. You know, you've heard what John said. Look at the faces of your people, particularly your people who are in the field and interfacing with the problems, the harms, and their faces will tell you whether they think that they are having a go and they're on top of it, or there's something that needs to change. And then my job is to actually start initiating that change. But of course, you don't do that alone. You need a bloody good CEO.
The first thing is I think it's a fair assumption that people aren't giving their best. Right? If your starting point is, let's be realistic. Most people keep a lot in the tank. I mean, they want to give it. I mean, again, if you walk around any regulatory organisation I've been to and say, why are you here? Why'd you come or why'd you stay? 4 out of 5 will give you the exact same answer. So I came here to make a difference. Well, are you making one? Often they'll say, oh, I'm not sure. Right. Most people are not giving of your best. And why is that? Well, there's a whole lot of issues around culture, but the way that the negativity of poor culture works is it erodes self-confidence and it erodes self-belief. Now, it's a gross generalisation, but life, to some extent, is a confidence game. You know, whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're generally right. So if you are in a leadership role in a regulator at a team or a group or a section or a geographic area or a chief executive, I'm telling you, you are in the confidence building business. Right? You need to, don't overthink it. You just need to assume that people are not giving of their best, and the reason that they're not is because they're humans and they fear looking stupid and failing. And your number one job is to put them in a position where they can give of their best, which means you are about building their confidence and self-belief. Now, there's no magic tablet on this. It's not easy, but there are some fundamentals, and a lot of it is about choosing challenges and coming together and having a real crack at them and getting that result. There is your capacity as a leader to say, I want the best of you. I don't want you to be what you're not, but I do want all of who you are. So who are you? You need to know your staff and know, the way to build confidence is to get people to use their strengths. Right? That's not fake confidence, that's real confidence. And as a leader out there, you've got to be saying, I see this in you. I want you to use more of that. Right? Or I saw you do that, I saw you using something that's special about you. Right? I need you to do more of that. You in regulatory work, because of these pressures that we talked about at the start, that shrink you in, that pull the armour around you. If you're in a leadership business, you are in the business of building confidence and self-belief.
Cheryl, on this point, because like very much hearing what you're saying, John, in terms of helping people be the best version of themselves and pointing them at the problem, and encouraging them. Cheryl, in your experience also sitting within government and then independent regulators and sitting on boards of service deliveries organisations, how do you create this insulative layer around the regulator as well? Because there's a number of pressures that, John, you're talking about that compress and make the regulator small. Deregulation, duty holders as clients, the notion of losing your authorising environment if you rigorously run down a certain harm, saying let's not go after that area because there's actually nothing to see here. How do you manage that competing pressure and insulate the regulator? Or is it not about insulation?
I think you can insulate to an extent, but let's face it, that's the nature of being a regulator. Those external pressures are always going to be there. It doesn't matter what your size is. It doesn't matter what you're protecting. You are always going to have those pressures, and they'll come. Sometimes you will have, contradictory pressures, or from the community versus what, your internally what's being said in the government. And so I think you can't insulate entirely. I think what we have to do is recognise those pressures. They come with the job. And it goes back to what I think I said in the beginning, which is the need for building a different culture in a regulator, for building confidence. And John's talked about that a lot. And for making sure people understand they have come to make a difference, because it's sort of it's a part of all of us. We want our lives to mean something. We want our work, not just our family, to mean something. We want our work to mean something. And so we have to create that environment, as leaders. And I think I didn't say this before, but it's really obvious between John and I, and even you, Bowie, is that communication becomes the critical tool of a leader. We have to say it. We have to say it over and over and over again. We have to build that confidence. And we don't explain away the external pressures on our organisations and even on individuals. We've all had it, that it comes with a job, and yes, it's wearing, and yes, it's hard. But if internally you come back into the fold and you can say you have done your best and why you've done your best and what was the situation, and be able to talk that through, I think it ameliorates some of that pressure.
John, I'm recalling a meeting you and I had with the board of a regulator, where the regulator board was comprised of people the regulator was subsequently really charged with regulating. Leveraging Cheryl's point, how do you maintain that confidence and embrace that that's your authorising environment when some part of your structural leadership of your organisation might be comprised of the people you regulate, or have very differing views about, no, they are a client and we need to service them and delight them? How do you manage this?
Yeah, that's funny. Listening to your question and Cheryl, I was just laughing because how often would we sit there and talk about balanced unhappiness out there? Well, we must be doing something right because everyone's equally unhappy with us. Yeah. So, but we're sort of making light of it. But actually, this is not a career for people who are a bit shy about criticism. Actually, I now that I'm no longer a practicing regulator just in the governance, I like a bit of cockiness in my regulation. I like a bit of presence. I mean, look at this shrinking away, because the only criticism that counts of a regulator is when a regulator entity says, you have disrespected me. Now, that is not acceptable. Right now, there is never an excuse. Even the villains have got rights and are entitled to be respected. That's when it all starts to be implied. But the rest of it, again, going back to that, we're the people in the middle of it. It's, when you're in the business of achieving of being big, right? Of achieving massive results with limited resource. When you are in a leveraging business, you're in the business of mobilising countless, like, in health and safety where I'm back now, we are mobilising thousands and thousands of health and safety reps, of union officials, of employer people, right? We are right in the middle, right? Right? We are the energy source that gets them all going in the right direction. So it's our job to make these difficult calls, and it's their job to criticise them, right? That's the nature of what it is. But that's life, and you're looking for that. That's genuinely that balanced unhappiness that says, right, okay, that's about right. Are we comfortable that we're doing the right thing? And are our stakeholders and our critical partners, are they feeling respected? Are they saying, are we transparent to them? Do we admit our mistakes to them? That's the real test, because we're making mistakes. This is judgment work. And we're big enough and cocky enough to say, yeah, we got that wrong. But let me say, one of the ironies of regulatory work is if you're making good mistakes, half the time nobody notices. It's amazing. Honestly, it's amazing. Some of the things, Cheryl, that we did in our time, which no one even picked up because we were running hard at the right problem. Really. The things that people notice are those mistakes of inactivity, of pausing, of taking too long. I wasn't sure what to do, so I didn't do anything. Now that's what gets you into trouble, right?
Yeah.
And we'll come back in a minute, because I think there's a critical issue about the whole team nature of this work too.
Cheryl, great question here on the Slido around, what do you do when you're in a department? You've got regulatory functions, but you don't see yourself as a regulator. The line management and the executive don't see you as a regulator. They're put on the influence hat, and that's all they're using. How do you manage it when you've got a regulatory function, but you're not performing as a regulator? How do you then encourage people to go, actually, we've got a whole set of tools here we haven't picked up yet? Have you come across this circumstance?
Not directly personally, but I've seen it happen. And I think, so I'm not speaking from my personal experience of a journey here, but I think what you've got to do is gather your team around you, particularly your leadership team, even if it's tiny leadership team, and talk about your authorising environment. What is it that the authorising environment, which is usually an act of parliament or whatever it is, requires of you? And then talk about why is it not happening? And it might be that you have these pressures within the department which says, we want to go soft, or they're really all good guys out there and we won't worry about it. I think you need to go back to why you're there in the first place, and you have to pull it apart. You have to pick it apart with your team. And then when you come to a conclusion, you have to then create the authorising environment within the department. Now that might mean, and that might be very difficult. It might be that you're reporting to someone without power, but you are going to have to create the authorising environment, reminding everybody what is it that, go back to those first principles, what is it that we are required to do? Then you talk about how you're going to do it. But first I think you need to re-establish your authorising environment within the department itself. And I think that's going to take some really good leadership, and you don't do it on your own. You talk about it with your team, and then you go and attack it.
John,
I don't know what you think, John.
Yeah, but John, what's your thoughts on this? I recall talking to a regulator's executive and saying, how many people in this room are a regulator? And about half the executive putting up their hand. How do you manage a situation when people don't think they're a regulator?
Yeah, well, it's a funny one. To be honest, like, I worked as a regulator for many years. I don't actually label myself as a regulator, really. I don't label myself as anything, but I think of myself as someone who is lucky enough to work in areas where there are important problems to be fixed. So, I mean, that's I see my, and so as a public servant who's entrusted to fix problems, you then open up the toolkit and say, well, okay, what have we got to work with here? We've got, we can do some marketing, we can do some education, we can spend some money and give some incentives. and we've got some laws, and we can impose some consequence. Now, depending on the nature of the problem, that will dictate the tool. It's not so much we're not one-trick ponies out there. We are paid. People are paying our wage to have less of something bad, and the choice of tool depends entirely on what fits the problem. It just turns out that you don't have to go to your textbook. Overwhelmingly, the lever that changes behaviour the most is consequence. Now, but you can't use consequence all the time. No point hitting people over the head if they don't know what to do, right? So you've got to make sure that people are given every chance to comply. The things have to make sense. There has to have a doability factor. There's got to be fair process. But in the toolkit of changing, of reducing harm and making good, consequence gets a good result. And so you get a lot better result than giving speeches and running ads. Ads are great at softening people up for consequence, but there's no substitute for, and not everybody either. I mean, you can't just go around flogging everybody out there, but you do need to identify that recalcitrant group and make sure that we're not wasting our time educating them.
We've got about 8 minutes left, and there's a few really great questions on the Slido. Cheryl, in the last few questions before we start to wind up, I'll merge a few questions here, but a few things that are coming off. Firstly, people say, how do we get to work for you guys? So there's a bit of vote of confidence from the audience. The second one is, how do you maintain morale and focus and passion when it is this ongoing, rather difficult job? Yeah.
I was going to say, John and I did this every day. I often tell the story of, I might tell quickly the story of when I was pre-interview John, and he's doing what he does now. He leans right in and his hands are going, and I thought, oh, I don't know. He's a big presence. But that big presence was incredibly important to EPA. I could tell, if I was in the office, 4 floors, open staircase in the middle, I could hear John coming up from the first floor. The noise just gathered floor by floor by floor as he went through, spoke to people on his way through. What have you done for the weekend? John knew if someone's father was sick. John knew all sorts of things about people's lives because he did that walk. And I think that's about leadership. But the other thing that I think was important to John and I was speaking to each other so regularly, because we immersed ourselves into the organisation, and it takes its toll at times. It really does. But having a mate beside you where you can share the load, I think is a really important part of that. But I think it does take what we had to do at EPA, and that was to immerse ourselves in the organisation, in its people, and that was our leadership style. I'm sure everybody does this differently, but I think the modelling of our behaviours created further modelling in the organisation, which was incredibly important.
Yeah, I think that Bowie goes to. I long since formed the view that leadership of organisations is not about just doing chief execs anymore. The job's too big, too vast, too hard for any one person. It's about combinations of people, and when it's beautiful, is complementary combinations of people. Why Cheryl and I had so much fun, because we always felt that together we were not invincible, but we were always better together than we were on our own. I was like, we did a lot of stuff together, didn't we, Cheryl? Because we just felt like supercharged when there were two. And it's a classic thing of what you're trying to get in leadership groups, where 1 + 1 equals more than 2. I will just say, Bo, just didn't answer that question about how do you get them going and all that sort of stuff. The bloody curse of harm reduction, of bloody regulatory work, is that everything is measured in degrees of failure. Right? We're here to prevent harm, but 50 people have still lost their life. 51 people have still lost their lives in workplaces in Victoria this year. Road toll is such, the number of events, the complaints, like everything is measured in degrees of failure. What version of life can be led without celebration and achievement and success? No, it's just completely counter to what we know to be a good life, which is that sense of achievement. So our job as leaders is to celebrate the hell out of anything that represents progress towards what we're doing. Like I was listening to some staff at work said that we've got like 80,000 clients on the system, and it's an enormous thing. And a fella who'd been off work for more than 12 years had got a job. One person. And the joy in the staff, like the sheer celebration, even though statistically it's completely, it's not a big thing. But our job is, in leadership, it's about, okay, let's go for this. And when we get it, let's really celebrate what a great thing, because you're constantly trying to build momentum and build that confidence and build that. And in particular, one of the odd things about regulatory work is that how often it descends into a solo activity. It's a team game. Yeah. Right? What you do affects what I do. When you walk into a workplace or any regulatory space with the badge of the organisation, everybody judges everybody else by you. So, you constantly we just don't put enough into the team element of this thing. We all depend on each other to make the difference and the big difference and to do our best. And the leadership, you just can't overemphasize. And you can't have this situation where I'm trying to do good in spite of the organisation. You end up with the ends justifying the means and all sorts of integrity stuff. Always, you've got to, this is a team. What you do affects what I do, right? And we have to be consistent in what we do and share high steps for each other. And then we celebrate each other's success in that way as well.
That's a lovely spot to almost end this call on. That notion of success being measured in degrees of failure, and that this is fundamentally a team sport in that setting. Cheryl, if you were going to leave people with any final thought?
Look, I just want to reach out through the screen and give every regulator a hug. Can't do a lot of hugging at the moment. But my really final thought is, how much regulators are appreciated and may not feel so, and how much we depend on regulators in the way we live our lives, no matter what we do. And it's such a fabric, an important fabric in our society. And to all of you, that is you. And so I do reach out and give you all a hug.
Thank you, Cheryl. Thank you, John. It has been a great conversation. I greatly appreciate you making the time